Excuse me, sir. I'd like to check my account balance, please. 10-year-old Stella Hammond stood at the gleaming marble counter of Metro Capital Bank, her small hand clutching a crumpled deposit slip. Her oversized green military jacket, splattered with white paint, hung past her knees. Her ripped jeans were stained at the knees, and her sneakers left faint dirt marks on the polished floor. Joel Thompson, the branch manager in his crisp white shirt, navy vest, and perfectly knotted red tie, stopped mid-sip of his latte. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a brief moment of amusement. It was a full-throated, wheezing laugh that echoed off the high ceilings and marble walls of the luxury bank. His mouth opened wide, his head tilted back, his finger pointed directly at Stella's paint-covered jacket. "You want to check what?" he wheezed between gasps, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Security. We have a comedian here." "Hello. Amazing people. Welcome back to Echoverse, the home where forgotten voices find their echo. Before we dive deeper into today's incredible story, kindly hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support means to us, and it helps us bring you even more exciting stories. Now let's begin. Joel's laughter hadn't subsided. If anything, it had grown louder, more performative. He turned away from Stella to address the other customers in the lobby, spreading his arms wide like a ringmaster introducing the next act. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption to your banking experience," he announced, his voice theatrical and dripping with sarcasm. "We seem to have a young entrepreneur here who believes she has an account with Metro Capital Bank." He gestured toward Stella with a flourish. "Security. We have a comedian here who thinks she has an account." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the lobby. The businessman near the ATM smirked and shook his head. The elderly woman in pearls whispered something to her husband, her expression a mixture of pity and disapproval. Stella stood motionless, her small frame seeming to shrink even further under the weight of Joel's mockery. Her fingers gripped the crumpled deposit slip so tightly it began to tear at the edges. "Tell you what," Joel continued, walking in a slow circle around her as if examining a curious specimen. "Why don't you tell us all about this account? How much do you think you have in there? $10? 20? He paused for effect, then laughed again. "Or maybe you're a secret millionaire, and that's why you're wearing a jacket that looks like someone threw up paint all over it." The female teller, Rachel, winced at her station but kept her eyes down. Marcus, the security guard, took a step forward, his radio in hand, though his expression was conflicted. Part duty, part disgust at what he was witnessing. "Sir, please." Stella's voice was barely audible, trembling. "I just need to check." "What you need?" Joel cut her off sharply, his jovial tone evaporating into cold irritation. "Is to understand that this isn't a place for games. This isn't a playground. Metro Capital Bank serves serious clients with serious wealth, not children in thrift store rags playing make-believe." He leaned down again, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow still carried across the silent lobby. "Do you even know what an account is? Do you understand how banks work? Or did someone send you in here on a dare?" Stella's lower lip quivered, but she bit down on it hard, refusing to let the tears fall. She could feel every eye in the bank on her, judging her jacket, her shoes, her hair, her very existence in this pristine temple of wealth. Joel straightened up and turned to Marcus. "Get her out of here before she starts asking customers for spare change. And if she won't leave voluntarily." He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but clear. The businessman by the ATM checked his watch impatiently. A young woman in a designer pantsuit pulled out her phone, not to help, but to text someone about the crazy scene at the bank. The classical music continued to play softly through the speakers, a serene soundtrack to Stella's humiliation. "I'm not going anywhere," Stella said suddenly, her voice stronger now, laced with defiance born of desperation. "My Uncle Evans told me to wait here if there was a problem. So I'm waiting." Joel's face darkened. His jaw clenched. The smile that had been plastered across his face finally vanished completely, replaced by something uglier. Genuine anger at being defied by someone he considered beneath him. "Your Uncle Evans," he repeated slowly, mockingly. "The famous artist uncle who definitely exists and definitely has an account here." He turned to the watching customers with another theatrical gesture. "Everyone, let's all wait for Uncle Evan, shall we? I'm sure he'll be here any minute in his—" "What?" "His paint-stained pickup truck." More uncomfortable laughter. But this time, a few people weren't laughing anymore. The elderly man with the pearl-wearing wife frowned slightly. A young mother with a toddler in her arms looked away, her expression troubled. Marcus's hand hovered near his radio, but he didn't call it in yet. Something about this felt wrong. The girl wasn't hysterical. She wasn't begging. She was just waiting, with a certainty that didn't match her appearance. "Last chance," Joel said, his voice now ice cold. "Walk out that door on your own, or Marcus here will escort you out. And trust me, sweetheart, you don't want that on your record when your real school finds out you were trespassing in a financial institution." Stella's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hand pressed against her sternum in the same unconscious gesture of anxiety her Uncle Evans had taught her to recognize. But she didn't move. She didn't run. She planted her feet in her worn sneakers on that gleaming marble floor and held her ground. "I'm waiting for my uncle," she repeated quietly. "He'll be here." Joel's face flushed an angry red. He opened his mouth to give Marcus a direct order, to have this defiant child physically removed from his bank. And that's when the automatic door slid open. Marcus Williams had been a security guard for 17 years, 8 in the military, 9 in private sector. He'd learned to read situations, to sense when something was about to go sideways. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming that Joel Thompson was making a catastrophic mistake. He stood near the entrance, his hand resting on his belt where his radio sat clipped next to his backup flashlight. His eyes moved between Joel, who was circling Stella like a shark, and the little girl herself, who stood with her shoulders squared despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Marcus had 2 daughters of his own, 9 and 12. He tried to imagine them standing alone in a place like this, being mocked by a grown man, and the image made his jaw tighten until his teeth ached. "Do something," a voice in his head urged. "Say something." But Marcus had a mortgage. He had child support payments from his first marriage. He had a mother in a nursing home whose care wasn't cheap. He'd been written up twice already this year for what Joel called overstepping his authority. Once for questioning why a black teenager had been followed around a VIP lounge, and once for suggesting that maybe the dress code policy was being applied more strictly to some customers than others. One more write-up, Joel had told him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "and we'll have to reevaluate your position here." So Marcus stayed silent. He told himself he was following protocol. Joel was the manager. Joel made the calls. Marcus was just security. His job was to observe and respond to direct threats, not to play social worker for every uncomfortable situation that arose. But his hand wouldn't move toward the radio. His feet wouldn't carry him forward to escort the girl out. He just stood there, frozen between his conscience and his fear, hating himself a little more with each passing second. Across the lobby, Rachel Chun pretended to organize paperwork at her teller station. She'd been shuffling the same 3 documents for 5 minutes now, her eyes fixed on the counter as if the grain held the secret to the universe. She could hear everything. Joel's mocking laughter, the child's trembling voice, the uncomfortable silence of the other customers. Rachel was 26, 2 years out of business school, drowning in student loan debt. Metro Capital Bank paid well. The benefits were good. She'd only been here 8 months, still in her probationary period. Joel had made it clear during her orientation that Metro Capital had standards and expectations, and that employees who couldn't maintain the bank's culture of excellence would be quickly replaced. She knew what he meant. She'd watched him turn away a woman in a wheelchair last month, claiming the bank was at capacity despite 3 empty seats in the waiting area. She'd seen him refuse to cash a check for an elderly man whose hands shook too much to sign perfectly on the first try. She'd heard the way he spoke about certain neighborhoods, certain types of people, always with that same condescending smile. And she'd said nothing. Every time. Now she risked a glance toward the girl. The paint-stained jacket was so oversized it looked like she was drowning in it. The ripped jeans, the worn sneakers, the way she clutched that crumpled piece of paper like it was a lifeline. Everything about her screamed vulnerability. But there was something else too. The set of her jaw. The way she refused to run even though every adult in the room was either mocking her or pretending she didn't exist. Rachel's hand moved toward the phone on her desk. She could call upstairs to the regional office. She could report what was happening. But then what? Joel would know it was her. She'd be labeled a troublemaker. She'd be fired, probably, or demoted, or transferred to some branch in a strip mall where her career would go to die. Besides, maybe the girl really was lying. Maybe this was some kind of scam. Maybe Joel knew something she didn't. He'd been here 12 years. Surely he could spot a fraud when he saw one. The rationalizations came easily. They always did. Behind the coffee bar, Thomas, the barista, wiped down the espresso machine for the 3rd time. He'd heard everything. His hands moved in slow, methodical circles, and he kept his head down, his face carefully neutral. He was 62 years old. He needed this job for 2 more years until his pension vested. Just 2 more years. Near the far wall, Diana, the branch's financial advisor, stood reviewing a client portfolio on her tablet. She'd noticed a commotion. Of course. Everyone had. But she had a meeting in 10 minutes with a hedge fund manager looking to move $3 million into municipal bonds. That was her focus. That was her priority. Whatever was happening at the front desk wasn't her department. The elderly couple who'd been whispering shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The husband leaned toward his wife. "Should we say something?" "It's not our business, Harold," she whispered back, though her fingers worried at the pearls around her neck. "I'm sure the manager knows what he's doing." The businessman at the ATM finished his transaction and headed for the door, giving Stella a wide berth as if poverty might be contagious. He had a son about her age. The thought flickered through his mind, uncomfortable and quickly suppressed. Throughout it all, Stella stood alone at the counter, surrounded by people who had the power to help her and chose not to. The classical music played on. The air conditioning hummed. The gold Bitcoin symbol on the wall gleamed in the recessed lighting. And every single person in that lobby would later claim they had no idea things would escalate the way they did. Stella's fingers had gone numb from gripping the deposit slip so tightly. The paper was damp now from the sweat of her palms, the ink beginning to smudge where her thumb pressed against the account number Uncle Evans had written in his careful, artistic hand. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, could feel the weight of every judging eye in the lobby pressing down on her like a physical force. But something else was rising inside her, too. Something that felt like the fire Uncle Evans always talked about when he painted. The thing that kept you going when the canvas fought back, when the colors wouldn't blend right, when everyone told you quit and get a real job. She lifted her chin and looked directly at Joel Thompson. "My uncle said come here," she said, her voice clearer now, stronger. Each word came out precise and deliberate. He said, I have an account. He wrote down the number. He said all I had to do was ask someone to look it up. Joel's smirk widened into something uglier. He crossed his arms over his chest, the fabric of his vest pulling tight across his shoulders. Your uncle? Right. This mysterious uncle who apparently banks at one of the most exclusive financial institutions in the city. He made a show of looking around the lobby, craning his neck toward the windows. Is your uncle the one sleeping on the bench outside? Should I go wake him up so he can come claim you? A few customers snickered. The businessman who'd been checking his watch earlier actually laughed out loud this time. Stella's jaw tightened. He's not homeless. He's an artist. His name is Evans Hammond. He paints murals all over the city. He's probably the most famous artist in. An artist? Joel interrupted, drawing the word out like it was something distasteful on his tongue. Oh, well, that explains everything. Because artists are known for their vast wealth and their accounts at institutions like Metro Capital. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Tell me, does he sell his paintings on the street corner? Is that where you got that lovely jacket? Did he give you his hand-me-downs? Stella's free hand moved instinctively to the paint stains on her sleeve. For a moment, shame flickered across her face. These stains that had seemed like badges of honor this morning when she'd been helping Uncle Evans. Proof that she was learning, that she was part of something meaningful, now felt like evidence of everything Joel was accusing her of being. We were working on a mural this morning, she said quietly, at the new community center on 5th Street. That's why I paint on me. He said I could take a break to come here and check my balance because I wanted to. She stopped herself. She didn't owe this man an explanation about why she needed to know if she had enough money for her best friend's birthday present. A community center, Joel repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like she'd said garbage dump. Of course, community centers, where all the really successful people work. He leaned forward, resting his palms on the counter, bringing his face closer to Stella's level. Let me explain something to you, little girl. This bank doesn't serve people who work at community centers. We serve people who donate the buildings that become community centers. Do you understand the difference? Stella took a step back, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble. But she didn't run. She didn't cry, though her eyes were beginning to burn with the effort of holding the tears back. My uncle is a client here, she insisted, her voice wavering now despite her best efforts. He banks here. He told me himself. He said. Joel mocked, his patience clearly exhausted. You know what I think? I think someone filled your head with fantasies. I think maybe you saw a wealthy-looking man walking around your neighborhood, and you decided to make up a story. Or maybe his eyes narrowed. Maybe this is a scam. Maybe someone sent you in here to see if we're stupid enough to hand cash to a sob story. I'm not lying. Stella's voice rose, high and desperate, and she hated how young she sounded, how powerless. Call him. I can give you his number. He'll tell you. I'm not calling anyone. Joel snapped. What I'm going to do is have you removed from this building before you disturb any more of our actual clients. He straightened up and turned toward Marcus. I gave you an order. Execute it. Now. Marcus finally moved, his hand going his radio, his face a mask of professional neutrality that hid the churning in his gut. Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. No. The word came out small, but absolute. Joel's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? No. Stella repeated, louder this time. I'm not leaving. My Uncle Evans told me that if there was ever a problem, if anyone ever made me feel like I didn't belong somewhere, I should stand my ground and wait for him. He said he'd always come. So I'm waiting. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Joel's face. He hadn't expected defiance. Children like this were supposed to slink away when confronted by authority, were supposed to accept their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. His surprise quickly curdled into anger. "You're waiting," he said, his voice dangerous now, all pretense of amusement gone. "You're going to stand in my bank, disrupting my business, because you're waiting for an imaginary rich uncle." "He's not imaginary," Stella said, and tears finally spilled down her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. "He's real, and he's coming." Joel opened his mouth to respond, his face flushed with genuine fury now, and the automatic doors at the entrance slid open with their soft mechanical whisper. Joel Thompson had reached his limit. This child, this paint-stained, defiant little intruder, had turned what should have been a simple removal into a spectacle. Customers were watching. His staff was watching. And worse, she was making him look weak, making him look like he couldn't control his own branch. He stepped out from behind the counter, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. The sound echoed to the lobby like gunshots, and several customers flinched at the sudden movement. Joel was a big man, 6'2", broad-shouldered from his college football days, accustomed to using his physical presence to intimidate when his words weren't enough. "All right, that's it," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I try to be patient. I try to be reasonable. But you clearly don't understand basic instructions." Stella took an instinctive step backward, her eyes widening. The deposit slip fluttered in her trembling hand. For the first time since she'd entered the bank, genuine fear crossed her face. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of being hurt. Joel closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He towered over her, his shadow falling across her small frame like a dark cloud. Up close, she could smell his cologne, expensive and overpowering. She could see the vein pulsing in his temple, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. "You're leaving," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Right now." "I'm waiting for my uncle," Stella whispered, but her voice had lost its earlier strength. She sounded exactly like what she was, a 10-year-old child, alone and scared. "Marcus," Joel barked, not taking his eyes off Stella. "Get over here and remove this girl from the premises. Use force if necessary." Marcus moved forward reluctantly, his hand near his radio but not quite touching it. "Sir, maybe we should just—" "Did I ask for your opinion?" Joel snapped, whipping his head toward the security guard. "Do your job or I'll find someone who will." The threat hung in the air. Marcus stopped moving, caught in the paralysis of self-preservation. Joel turned back to Stella. "Last chance to walk out on your own 2 feet with some dignity." "Please," Stella said, her voice breaking. "Just look up the account number. That's all I'm asking. Just look." Joel's hand shot out and grabbed her upper arm. The grip wasn't brutal, but it was firm, commanding, the kind of hold security guards use on shoplifters. His fingers wrapped around her thin arm, the paint-stained sleeve of her oversized jacket bunching up under his palm. "Let go of me." Stella tried to pull away, but Joel's grip tightened. "You had your chance," Joel said, beginning to steer her toward the door. "You made your choice. Now we do this the hard way." Several customers looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the magazines on the waiting area tables. The elderly woman with the pearls actually stood up, as if to intervene, but her husband pulled her back down with a firm shake of his head. Rachel, the teller, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Thomas, the barista, had stopped even pretending to work and stood frozen, watching. Diana, the financial advisor, had finally looked up from her tablet, her expression troubled but her feet rooted to the spot. Stella's sneakers squeaked against the marble as Joel pulled her forward. The deposit slip slipped from her fingers and fluttered to ground, landing face up with the account number clearly visible. Not that anyone bothered to look. "You're hurting me," Stella said, trying to twist out his grasp. "I'm barely touching you," Joel replied coldly. "Stop being dramatic." They were halfway to the door when Stella did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She dropped her weight, letting her knees buckle, becoming dead weight in Joel's grip. It was something Uncle Evans had taught her during one of his stories about protest marches, about civil disobedience, about the power of nonviolent resistance. "Get up," Joel hissed, trying to pull her to her feet without making a scene. "No," Stella said, her voice muffled but clear. "I'm not leaving. My uncle said to wait, so I'm waiting." Joel's face went from red to purple. Other customers were definitely watching now, their expressions ranging from disapproval to discomfort to outright concern. This had crossed a line. This wasn't just removing a nuisance anymore. This was a grown man manhandling a child. "Marcus," Joel shouted, his voice cracking with fury, "get over here and help me remove this." The automatic doors slid open. The sound was soft, barely audible over classical music, and the growing murmur of concerned customers. But something about it made everyone in the lobby turn toward the entrance. A voice filled the space, deep and resonant and vibrating with controlled fury. "Take your hand off my niece. Now!" Evans Hammond stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Joel's monthly salary. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. His watch caught the light. Patek Philippe, the kind that required a waiting list and a reference from existing owners. But what made everyone in the lobby stare wasn't his height or his clothes or even the obvious wealth he radiated. It was his eyes. They were locked on Joel's hand, still gripping Stella's arm, and they burned with the kind of rage that made smart people back away slowly. Joel's hand released Stella's arm so fast it was as if he'd been burned. Stella scrambled to her feet and ran toward her uncle, who caught her against his chest, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders. The single smudge of white paint on his right hand, the same paint that covered Stella's jacket, stood out starkly against his dark suit. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the classical music seemed to have faded into background noise. Every eye was on a man in the doorway, and the child pressed against his side. Joel stood frozen, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. The expensive suit, the watch, the bearing, the protective stance, the paint that connected them. This wasn't a homeless man from the bench outside. This was someone important. And Joel Thompson had just made a very, very serious mistake. The voice that cut through Metro Capital Bank didn't shout. It didn't need to. It carried the kind of authority that comes from years of command, from knowing your worth, from never having to raise your voice because people listen the first time. "Take your hand off my niece. Now!" Every head in the lobby snapped toward the entrance. The automatic doors had opened so smoothly, so quietly, that the sudden presence of a man standing in the doorway felt almost supernatural, as if he materialized out of thin air. Evans Hammond filled the entrance in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size and everything to do with the force of his presence. He stood 6'3", with broad shoulders that spoke of athleticism even in his late 40s. His skin was a rich, deep brown that seemed to absorb and reflect the lobby's recessed lighting. His hair was cut close, with distinguished threads of silver at the temples. His beard was meticulously groomed, but it was his eyes that commanded attention. Dark, intelligent, and at this moment absolutely incandescent with fury. He wore a charcoal gray suit that had clearly been custom-tailored, the kind of garment that moved with him like a second skin, the fabric catching the light in a way that only came from exceptional craftsmanship and exceptional expense. His white shirt was crisp, his tie a deep burgundy. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to such a shine that they reflected the marble floor Beneath them, on his left wrist, a Patek Philippe watch gleamed, not ostentatious, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. And on his right hand, stark against the perfection of his appearance, was a single smudge of white paint. The same paint that covered Stella's jacket. The same paint that had been used as evidence of her supposed worthlessness just moments ago. Joel's hand released Stella's arm as if he'd touched a hot stove. He stumbled backward, his face cycling rapidly through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Stella didn't hesitate. She ran across the marble floor, her worn sneakers slapping against the polished stone, and threw herself against her uncle. Evans caught her with one arm, pulling her against his chest while his eyes never left Joel's face. "Uncle Evans!" Stella sobbed against his suit jacket, her voice muffled. He wouldn't listen. I told him you said I could come here, but he wouldn't." "Shoo, baby girl. I know. Evans's voice, when he spoke to Stella, was warm and gentle, a stark contrast to the cold fury he'd used on Joel. His hand stroked her hair, careful not to disturb her afro puff. "You did everything right. You stood your ground, just like I taught you." He looked down at her, and his expression softened momentarily as he saw the tears streaming down her face, the trembling in her small frame. But when his eyes lifted back to the lobby, to Joel, to Marcus still standing uselessly by, to Rachel pretending to work at her station, to all the customers who had watched a child be humiliated and said nothing, that softness evaporated like water on a hot skillet. "Which one of you?" Evans said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the lobby. "Put your hands on my niece?" No one spoke. The silence was absolute. Even the classical music seemed to have stopped, though that might have been everyone's imagination. Joel cleared his throat, trying to summon some semblance of authority. His brain was racing, trying to calculate who this man was, how much damage control would be needed. The suit alone probably cost $15,000. The watch was easily 6 figures. And the way he carried himself, the way everyone in the lobby had instinctively straightened up when he entered. This was someone important, very important. "Sir," Joel began, forcing his voice into something approximating professional courtesy. "I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding, but this child came into the bank making claims that seemed—" "I asked a question," Evans interrupted, his voice still quiet, still controlled, but with an edge now that made Joel's words die in his throat. "I didn't ask for excuses or justifications. I asked which one of you put your hands on a 10-year-old girl." He took a step forward, still holding Stella against his side. His expensive shoes clicked against a marble with the same sharp authority Joel's had just minutes ago. But where Joel's steps had been predatory, Evans's were purposeful. "Was it you?" Evans's eyes locked on Marcus, who stood frozen near the counter, his hand still hovering near his radio. "No, sir," Marcus said quickly, his voice rough. "I mean, I was ordered to escort her out, but I didn't." "But you were going to," Evans observed coldly. "You were going to put your hands on her because your manager ordered you to." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no good answer to that. Evans's gaze swept to Rachel, who had gone pale behind her teller station. "And you? Did you say anything? Did you ask why a child was being treated this way?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. Finally, Evans's attention settled on Joel, who stood in the middle of the lobby like a man watching his career implode in slow motion. "You," Evans said, and the single word carried the weight of judgment. "You grabbed her arm." It wasn't a question. Joel's mouth opened and closed. "Sir, I was simply attempting to maintain order in—" "You grabbed a child," Evans repeated, taking another step forward. Stella was still pressed against his side, her face hidden against his jacket, but she'd stopped crying. She was listening now, feeling the shift in power that had occurred the moment her uncle walked through those doors. A 10-year-old girl who came into your bank with a legitimate request, and you put your hands on her. She was refusing to leave, Joel said, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. She was causing a disturbance, claiming to have an account here when clearly... Clearly what? Evans's voice dropped even lower, became even more dangerous. When clearly she looks too poor, too black, too young? Which part of her appearance told you she didn't belong in your bank? The lobby had become a courtroom, and everyone in it knew they were witnessing something significant. Joel's face flushed red. That's not, I was simply following protocol for her. For what? Evans demanded. For children? Do you grab every child who comes in here? Or just the ones who don't meet your visual standards of wealth? Joel's mind was racing, synapses firing desperately as he tried to piece together who this man was. The suit, the watch, the bearing, these weren't things you could fake. This was real wealth, the kind that came with power and connections. And something about the man's face was familiar, teasing at the edges of Joel's memory, like a word on the tip of his tongue. Then it clicked. Evans Hammond, the artist. Not just any artist. The muralist whose work commanded six-figure commissions, whose pieces hung in corporate lobbies and government buildings across 3 continents. Joel had seen his photo in the business section of the paper just last month. Something about an installation at the new Performing Arts Center downtown. And more importantly, Joel had seen his name on the VIP client list that landed on his desk every quarter. Evans Hammond was one of Metro Capital's platinum-tier clients, the kind of account that brought in enough revenue that regional management sent personal thank-you notes. Joel felt the blood drain from his face. Mr. Hammond, he stammered, his voice suddenly stripped of all its earlier condescension. I didn't realize. We weren't informed you'd be visiting today. Obviously, Evans said coldly. He hadn't moved from his protective stance over Stella, hadn't softened his expression 1 degree. Joel's brain scrambled to reconcile what he was seeing. Evans Hammond, whose quarterly investment statements probably had more zeros than Joel would see in his lifetime, was claiming this paint-stained, ragged child as his niece. It didn't make sense. Important people didn't send their children or nieces to banks looking like they just crawled out of a homeless shelter. Important people hired accountants, assistants, people who handled these things for them. Sir, Joel said, forcing his voice into something approaching professional courtesy, though his hands trembled slightly. If I'd known she was with you, of course we would have... Would have what? Evans interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. Treated her like a human being? Shown her basic respect? Or would you have just fawned over her because of her connection to me? Joel opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no right answer to that question. Let me make sure I understand the situation, Evans continued, his arm still wrapped protectively around Stella. My niece came into this bank with a legitimate account number, asked politely to check her balance, and your response was to mock her appearance, question her intelligence, threaten her with police action, and physically grab her. Is that an accurate summary? There were circumstances. Joel began. Circumstances, Evans repeated, the word dripping with contempt. What circumstances? That she's wearing paint? We were working on a mural this morning at the 5th Street Community Center. The one your bank donated $50,000 to last year for that nice tax write-off and photo opportunity. She's wearing paint because she was helping me create art. What's your excuse for your behavior? Several customers shifted uncomfortably. The elderly woman with the pearls actually gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth as understanding dawned. Joel's confusion was written plainly across his face. He looked from Evans in his bespoke suit to Stella in her oversized, stained jacket, trying to reconcile the connection. Why would someone like Evans Hammond have a niece who looked like That, why wouldn't she be dressed appropriately if she was coming to a bank? Why wouldn't Evans have called ahead, made arrangements, ensured there would be no confusion? I don't understand, Joel said, and for once his confusion was genuine. Why didn't she say she was your niece from the beginning? Evans's expression grew colder still. She did. Multiple times, from what I understand. You just didn't believe her because she didn't look the way you thought a wealthy man's niece should look. But why would you send her alone? Joel pressed, still trying to find some logical thread that would make this nightmare make sense. If she needed to check an account, why not what? Why not wrap her in designer clothes first? Why not send her with a chaperone to vouch for her humanity? Evans's voice rose for the first time, anger breaking through his controlled fury. She's a child running an errand for her uncle. That should be enough. The fact that you needed her perform wealth, to prove her worth through her appearance before you treat her with basic dignity, says everything about you and nothing about her. Rachel, still at her teller station, had tears streaming down her face now. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Thomas, the barista, had abandoned all pretense of working and stood with his arms crossed, his expression ashamed. Mr. Hammond, Joel tried again, his voice taking on a pleading quality now. I assure you if I'd known. That's the problem. Evans cut him off sharply. You keep saying if I'd known. As if the only reason to treat a child with respect is if she has connections to someone powerful. As if her humanity, her dignity, her right to exist in this space only matters if she can prove she's attached to someone you deem worthy. He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with every person who'd watched Stella's humiliation. My niece came in here looking exactly like what she is, a young girl who spent her morning helping her uncle paint a mural that will bring beauty to an underserved community. She was tired, she was paint-stained, and she was honest. And every single one of you looked at her and decided she was worthless. The silence that followed was devastating. Several customers suddenly found the floor fascinating. Diana, the financial advisor, had set down her tablet and was staring at Evans with an expression of horror, perhaps finally seeing the full scope of what had occurred. I need to see my niece's account, Evans said, his voice returning to that dangerous quiet. The one she asked you to pull up 40 minutes ago. The one you refused to believe existed. Joel swallowed hard. Of course, Mr. Hammond. Right away. If you'll just step over to... No, Evans said flatly. Not at your desk. Right here. At the main counter, where everyone can see. I want every person in this lobby to witness what you refuse to believe. Joel's hands trembled as he moved behind the counter. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The walk from the middle of the lobby back to his workstation felt like a death march, every eye in the bank boring into his back. He could feel his career unraveling with each step, could sense the weight of his catastrophic errors settling around his shoulders like a shroud. Evans guided Stella forward, keeping his arm protectively around her shoulders. They stopped at the counter, directly across from Joel's terminal. Evans reached down and picked up the crumpled deposit slip from where it had fallen on the marble floor when Joel had grabbed Stella's arm. He smoothed it out carefully, reverently, as if it were something precious. This, he said, placing it on the counter and sliding it toward Joel, is the account number my niece tried to show you, the one you refused to look at because you'd already decided she wasn't worth your time. Joel stared at the smudged paper, at the neat handwriting that spelled out a 9-digit count number. His throat felt like sandpaper. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, but he couldn't seem to make them move. Type it in, Evans said quietly. It wasn't a request. The lobby had gone so silent that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Every customer, every employee, every person in that space had stopped what they were doing to watch. Rachel had come out from behind her teller station, standing in the open where she could see Joel's screen. Marcus had moved closer, his earlier paralysis replaced by morbid curiosity. Even Thomas had emerged from behind the coffee bar. Joel's fingers finally found the keys. He typed slowly, carefully, double-checking each digit against a deposit slip. His mouth had gone completely dry. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he was already calculating. Maybe it was a checking account with $50, maybe $100. Maybe he could spend this. Could claim he'd been protecting the bank from potential fraud. Could argue that proper protocols required additional verification for minors accessing accounts. He hit enter. The screen refreshed. For a moment, Joel simply stared at the monitor, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked again. The number didn't change. "Read it out loud," Evans said, his voice cutting through Joel's shocked silence. "I want everyone in this lobby to hear it." Joel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who just watched his entire world collapse. "Read it," Evans repeated, his tone hardening. "Or I will, too." Joel's voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat, tried again. $2,500,000. The last word came out as barely a whisper. And 63 cents. The gasp that went through the lobby was audible. The elderly woman with the pearls actually stood up from her seat, her hand over her heart. The businessman who'd laughed earlier had gone pale. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth, and she made a small, wounded sound. Marcus closed his eyes and shook his head slowly, as if praying for the ground to open up and swallow him. Evans leaned forward slightly, not enough to be threatening, but enough that Joel had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. "Say it again, louder this time. Make sure everyone hears the account balance of the homeless girl you just assaulted. $2.5 million. Joel repeated, his voice mechanical, dead. He couldn't stop staring at the screen, at the pristine account history that showed regular deposits, investment dividends, compound interest building on itself in a way that only serious, professionally managed wealth could achieve. Stella, still pressed against her uncle's side, looked up at Evans with wide eyes. Is that really mine?" "Every penny," Evans said softly, his voice warm when he spoke to her. "Your parents set it up before they died. It's been growing for you, waiting for you. I'm just a trustee until you turn 18. He looked back at Joel, and his voice went cold again. "This is a trust fund, professionally managed by the same wealth management firm that handles my own portfolio. The same firm that brings this bank approximately $4 million a year in revenue. And you just grabbed the beneficiary and tried to throw her out on the street." Joel had gone gray. His hands rested on the keyboard, as if he'd forgotten how to move them. The screen glowed in front of him. That number, $2,500,063, a damning testament to his prejudice. "She came in here," Evans continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent lobby, asking to check her balance because she wanted to know if she had enough money to buy her best friend a birthday present. A simple transaction that should have taken 3 minutes. Instead, you turned it into a humiliation that she'll remember for the rest of her life. He paused, letting that sink in. "And do you know what the worst part is?" Evans asked, his eyes boring into Joel's. "If I hadn't walked through that door when I did, you would have succeeded. You would have thrown her out, filed some report about a disturbed child, and gone about your day feeling righteous about maintaining your bank standards. And she would have gone home believing that the world had confirmed what you spent 40 minutes trying to teach her, that she's worthless." Rachel was openly crying now, her makeup running down her cheeks. Marcus had his head bowed, unable to watch. Several customers had gathered closer, drawn by the drama, their expressions ranging from shock to shame to vindication for those who'd felt uncomfortable but said nothing. Joel opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to make excuses, but Evans held up a hand. "Don't," he said simply. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better, but there is something you're going to do." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "You're going to stand there while I call Patricia Edwards, your regional director, and you're going to explain to her exactly what happened here today." Joel's face went from gray to white. "Mr. Hammond, please." "Please." Evans's eyebrows rose. "That's interesting. That's the same word my niece used. Multiple times. Do you remember how you responded?" The question hung in the air, rhetorical and devastating. Evans had already started dialing. Evans held his phone to his ear, but before the call connected, he lowered it slightly. His eyes swept across the lobby, taking in every face, every person who had witnessed what happened to Stella and chosen silence. When he spoke, his voice carried that same professor's cadence, the tone of someone delivering a lesson that needed to be learned. "Before I make this call," he said, "I want everyone here to understand something. Those paint stains on my niece's jacket, the ones you use as evidence of her worthlessness." He gestured to Stella's oversized green military jacket, still splattered with white. "That's acrylic paint, professional grade, the kind I use for my murals." He paused, letting that information settle. "This morning, Stella and I were working on a community mural at the 5th Street Community Center, the same center this bank made a big show of donating to last year. I believe there's still a plaque with Metro Capital's name on it in the lobby." His voice dripped with irony. "The mural depicts children from the neighborhood reaching for the stars. Stella helped me sketch the faces. She mixed colors. She learned about perspective and light. She got paint all over herself because she was creating something beautiful." Rachel made a small broken sound from her position near the teller station. Several customers looked away, shame etched across their features. "I told her she could take a break and run an errand," Evans continued. "Check her account balance. See if she had enough money saved to buy her best friend a birthday present. It was supposed to teach her about financial responsibility, about managing money, about being independent." His jaw tightened. Instead, she learned a different lesson. She learned that in America, your humanity is conditional, that you can have $2.5 million in the bank, but if you're black and you're young and you're wearing the wrong clothes, none of that matters. Joel stood frozen behind the counter, his face a mask of misery. But Evans wasn't done with him yet. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Thompson," Evans said, and his voice took on that lecturing quality again, the kind that made everyone in the room feel like they were back in school. "There's a difference between net worth and self-worth. Net worth is what's in that account, numbers on a screen, dollars in a trust fund. Self-worth is what my niece walked in here with this morning. It's the confidence that comes from knowing you're a human being deserving of respect, regardless of your bank balance." He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with each person. "You saw her net worth just now, $2.5 million. But her self-worth? That's something you try to destroy. You spent 40 minutes teaching a 10-year-old girl that she's less than human because she didn't perform well the way you expected her to." Evans's hand tightened on Stella's shoulder, pulling her closer. "My niece is brilliant. She has straight A's in school. She volunteers at the animal shelter every Saturday. She's learning 3 languages. She paints. She writes poetry. She plays piano. She's kind to everyone she meets, even people who don't deserve it." His voice hardened. "But none of that mattered to you, did it? Because you couldn't see past her jacket. You couldn't see past her age, her skin color, her appearance. You looked at her and saw garbage, something to be removed, a problem to be solved." "Mr. Hammond, Joel began. "I'm not finished." Evans cut him off sharply. Here's what you don't understand. That paint on her jacket? In my world, that's a badge of honor. That means she was working, creating, contributing. That means she wasn't afraid to get dirty in pursuit of something meaningful. But in your world, it was evidence that she didn't belong. He gestured around the pristine lobby. The marble floors, the recessed lighting, the gold Bitcoin symbol gleaming on the wall. You've built yourself a temple to money here. Everything is polished and perfect and sterile. And you've convinced yourselves that the cleanliness of the space reflects the quality of the people in it. But let me tell you something. I've met homeless people with more class than what I witnessed here today. I've met janitors with more dignity than your entire staff showed my niece. Marcus flinched at that, his hands clenching at his sides. Class, Evans continued, his voice rising slightly, isn't about what you wear or what you drive or where you bank. Class is how you treat people who can't do anything for you. It's how you treat the waitress, the parking attendant, the delivery driver. It's how you treat a 10-year-old girl in a paint-stained jacket. He looked directly at Joel. You failed that test spectacularly. The elderly woman with the pearls was nodding now, tears streaming down her face. Her husband had his arm around her, his own expression grave. The businessman who'd laughed earlier had his hand over his face, unable to meet anyone's eyes. My niece's parents died in a car accident when she was 3 years old, Evan said quietly, and Stella pressed closer to him, her fingers gripping his suit jacket. They were school teachers. Public school, inner city. They didn't make much money, but they saved every penny they could for her future. They set up that trust fund by sacrificing everything, vacations, new cars, nights out. They lived in a tiny apartment and drove a 15-year-old Honda because they wanted their daughter to have opportunities they never had. His voice thickened with emotion. They died making sure she'd be taken care of. And today, you try to teach her that their sacrifice meant nothing because she doesn't look like your idea of wealth. Joel's eyes were glistening now. Whether from shame or fear or genuine remorse, it was impossible to tell. Net worth versus self-worth, Evans repeated. One is earned through luck, inheritance, investment, hard work. It's external. The other is inherent. It's what you're born with as a human being. And the fact that you couldn't see my niece's self-worth because her net worth wasn't visible tells me everything I need to know about you. He raised his phone again. Now I'm going to make this call. And you're going to explain to Patricia Edwards why Metro Capital Bank just lost one of its platinum clients and is about to face a very public conversation about how it treats black children. Evans pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Patricia, Evans said when the line connected, his voice professionally cordial but with steel underneath. It's Evans Hammond. I'm standing in the 5th Street branch right now with my niece, and we need to have a conversation about your branch manager, Joel Thompson. Patricia Edwards arrived at the 5th Street branch within 20 minutes, her heels clicking against the marble with the sharp precision of an executioner approaching the scaffold. She was a tall woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She'd been Metro Capital's regional director for 12 years, and in that time, she'd built a reputation for ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for anything that threatened the bank's reputation. Evans was still in the lobby when she arrived, Stella tucked against his side. He hadn't let her go since he'd walked through those doors. Patricia's eyes took in the scene immediately. The tearful teller, the ashamed security guard, the customers who couldn't quite look anyone in the eye, and Joel Thompson, standing behind his desk like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew. My office, Patricia said to Joel, her voice clipped. Now, what happened in that office over the next 15 minutes became legend among Metro Capital employees. Patricia pulled up the security footage, all of it, from the moment Stella walked through the doors to the moment Evans grabbed his niece and held her. She watched Joel's mocking laughter, his theatrical gestures, his hand gripping Stella's arm. She listened to the audio, hearing every cruel word, every assumption, every moment of humiliation. When they emerged, Joel's face was ashen. He walked to his desk without looking at anyone, packed his belongings into a cardboard box, his coffee mug, a framed photo of his college football team, his nameplate, and left through the back entrance without a word. He would never work in banking again. Patricia would make sure of that. She approached Evans and Stella, her expression carefully controlled. "Mr. Hammond, on behalf of Metro Capital Bank, I offer our deepest apologies. What happened here today was unacceptable, unconscionable, and entirely contrary to our values and policies." Evans looked at her for a long moment. "Your values and policies allowed a child to be brutalized for 40 minutes while your entire staff watched. The problem isn't one bad manager. The problem is a culture that made everyone in this room complicit." Patricia didn't flinch. "You're right, and we will address that immediately." She turned to the rest of the staff. "Mandatory bias training for every employee in this branch, starting Monday. Marcus, you're suspended for 1 week without pay for failure to intervene. Rachel, same. The rest of you," her eyes swept the lobby, "you witnessed discrimination and chose silence. Consider yourselves on notice." Evans studied her face, then nodded slowly. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo what Stella had experienced. But it was something. 10 years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Stella Hammond stood in the gallery space of the Hammond Arts Foundation, surrounded by young artists whose work hung on pristine white walls. She was 20 now, a junior at the Rhode Island School of Design, with her natural hair grown out into a magnificent crown of curls. She wore paint-stained jeans, designer this time, but stained nonetheless, and a vintage band t-shirt under a blazer. On the wall behind her, framed and mounted like the precious artifact it had become, hung a paint-splattered green military jacket. A small placard beside it read, "Resilience by Stella Hammond, Mixed Media, 2015. This scholarship," Stella said to the dozen teenagers seated in folding chairs before her, kids from neighborhoods where art supplies were luxuries and college felt like an impossible dream, "is for young artists who don't look the part, who show up in thrift store clothes with paint under their fingernails, who get told they don't belong in galleries or art schools or banks." She smiled, and it was a smile of someone who'd learned hard lessons and survived them. "The Hammond Foundation will cover your full tuition, supplies, and living expenses. No strings attached. Because your worth isn't measured by what you wear or where you come from. It's measured by your vision, your passion, your willingness to create even when the world tells you that you don't matter." One girl in the front row raised her hand tentatively. She wore a jacket 3 sizes too big, covered in marker doodles. "What if we're not good enough yet?" Stella walked over and knelt beside her chair. "Good enough for whom? The people who judge you by your shoes? The people who look at you and see what you don't have instead of what you are?" She shook her head. "Those people don't get to define your worth. Only you do." After the presentation, as the teenagers filter out with application packets clutched in their hands and hope written on their faces, an older woman approached Stella. It was Rachel Chun, 15 pounds heavier and with streaks of gray in her hair now, no longer working at Metro Capital Bank. "I don't expect you to remember me," Rachel said quietly, her voice trembling. "But I was there, that day, at the bank. I was the teller who said nothing." Stella studied her face, and recognition flickered. "I remember." "I'm sorry," Rachel said, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've wanted to say that for 10 years. I was a coward. I let you suffer because I was afraid for my job, and there's no excuse for that. None." Stella was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an application packet. "The foundation is also looking for mentors. People who've made mistakes and learned from them. People who can teach these kids not just about art, but about integrity. She held out the packet. Interested? Rachel took it with shaking hands, staring at Stella with something like wonder. "You'd trust me?" "You owned your mistake," Stella said simply. "That's more than most people do. What matters now is what you do with the lesson." That evening, Stella returned to the Foundation's office, a converted warehouse space in what used to be an industrial district. Uncle Evans was there, as he always was, working on a massive canvas that would eventually become a mural for the new children's hospital downtown. "How'd it go?" he asked, not looking up from his work. 12 kids, Stella said, pulling up a stool beside him. All of them brilliant. All of them scared that they're not enough. "Sounds familiar," Evans said with a slight smile. He finally looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the confident young woman she'd become. "Your parents would be so proud." Stella picked up a brush, dipped it in white paint, and added a single stroke to canvas. "Joel Thompson works at a check cashing place now. Did you know that?" Evans paused. "I heard. He sent a letter," Stella continued, "through the foundation. He said he's been in therapy. Said he wanted to apologize for whatever that's worth after 10 years. And..." Stella set down the brush. "I haven't decided if I'll read it yet. Some days I think forgiveness is the right answer. Other days I remember standing in that lobby with everyone staring at me like I was trash. And I think some things don't deserve forgiveness. They just deserve consequences." Evans put his arm around her shoulders. Both things can be true. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by art and possibility and the ghosts of lessons learned the hard way. "Uncle Evans?" Stella said quietly. "Yeah, baby girl? Thank you for walking through those doors." "Always," he said, pulling her close. "Always." On the wall across from them, visible through the office window, the Hammond Arts Foundation's mission statement was painted in bold letters. "Your worth is not determined by those who cannot see your value. Your dignity is inherent, not earned. Your voice matters, regardless of who tries to silence it." And beneath it, painted in white against a deep blue background, a simple image. A child's hand reaching for the stars, palm covered in paint, refusing to be defined by anyone's limited vision of what she could become.